Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get started in just a moment. We just want to give everybody a chance to log in. Thanks again for joining us tonight. We're just going to give everybody a chance to log in. We're going to get started momentarily. Okay, well, we should get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael King. I'm the Executive Director here at the Southwest Seattle Historical Society. Thanks for joining us for tonight's program. We've been looking forward to this one for quite some time. It's been a long time in the making. So again, we're grateful that you've joined us tonight. I hope you all managed to weather the heat earlier this week successfully. And again, hopefully you're able to enjoy some respite, and I'm glad you've joined us this evening. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that the Southwest Seattle Historical Society and our Log House Museum are located on the traditional land of the Duwamish people, Seattle's first people, past and present. We honor with gratitude the Duwamish people who've stewarded this land throughout the generations from time immemorial. Before we begin tonight's interview, I want to note that the Historical Society, of course, is incredibly grateful to our sponsors, For Culture, Duwamish Tribal Services, and Home Street Bank, who've made this program possible. I also want to take a moment to thank all of you. I know so many of you made contributions to support our programming, and your generosity sustains our ability to offer programs like this one, as well as our free offerings like Words Writers and Southwest Stories, and our free field trip and digital tour experiences that we offer to school groups and other community groups across the peninsula and beyond. So thank you again. We can't do this without you, and we are grateful to you. Given tonight's the topic of tonight's program, I also really want to thank our presenting sponsor, Luna Park Cafe, whose commitment to our organization and mission has it's been completely inspiring, and that's particularly the case over the last year and a half, which of course has been a challenging one. Luna Park Cafe's owner, John Bennett, who happens to be a member of our board of trustees, has been a tremendous champion of local history and of course of this organization. So I'd encourage all of you to stop by Luna Park Cafe when you have a chance for a bite to eat or for a milkshake, particularly in this hot weather, to support our sponsor who's been so supportive of us. I know everyone on this call has probably participated in a Zoom call of some kind before. We've been at this for quite some time, but if you're joining us for the first time, when we open things up to an audience Q&A for tonight's speaker, we'd ask you to use the Q&A function in Zoom, which it should be at the bottom of your screen. So if you have a question for Paul, please type it into the Q&A function and I'll direct your question to Paul for you. Beyond that, we should get started. I know we've got a full program this evening and you didn't tune in to listen to me. We're thrilled to be joined this evening by Paul Moyes. Paul is a West Seattleite who, as you know, released a wonderfully well-researched documentary on Luna Park, the peninsula's short-lived amusement park, which was located on Duwamish Head in the first part of the 20th century. Paul moved here to Seattle in the 90s from Michigan to study at University of Washington, and he's been involved in photography for quite some time, but this Luna Park documentary is his first documentary. So I guess that leads me to my first question for you, Paul. Before we dive into the film itself and the history of Luna Park, I'm wondering if you might tell us just a little bit more about yourself and your background and maybe what drew you to filmmaking.
Yeah, absolutely. So I came from a small one blinking red light town called North Muskegon, Michigan. Graduated with 48 people in my class, probably 40 of which we attended preschool through high school together with. Eventually made it, as you mentioned, out to the University of Washington, graduated in biological oceanography of all things. Really, there was no question that after graduating whether I'd stay in the Pacific Northwest. I just absolutely loved it. Went on to get my MBA at Seattle University, met my wife out here. We bought our house in West Seattle over 18 years ago. And I think it's a fair bet it's probably our first and last house. We just absolutely love it. Love the neighbors, love the people, the restaurants. all the recreation around us. I think that sign that we've all seen, wouldn't leave West Seattle if we could, which probably is pretty much applies to us as well. As far as hobbies and interests, I've just dabbled in just about darn everything: hiking, climbing, paragliding, music. In fact, that intro and the exit song of this film was made by me and my buddy. I think it fit the theme, but really the cost to put it in the film really fit with the budget, which was $0. So yeah, I've dabbled in a lot of activities, and I guess you could now add documentary filmmaking to that list. I wouldn't really call myself, though, as far as filmmaking a filmmaker quite yet. I have quite a bit to learn, quite honestly. But what really drew me in, as you mentioned, was that photography background, and I guess making that obvious transition was a pretty logical next step. And other than that, I would say my wife and a friend made a video a couple of months before this project kicked off. It was just a funny mock video for another friend's birthday. And I just absolutely loved putting it together and editing it and kind of just putting all the pieces together. So I really knew I had to do another film after that.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. So I guess the next question would be, what compelled you to explore the history of Luna Park in particular? Is there something in particular that drew your interest in that direction?
Yeah, so before COVID, I was in the corporate world, so to speak, running a distribution center network. And once COVID hit, that customer decided to shut down the operation. So that path ended abruptly. At the same time, like the bridge being closed and the commute outside, and really even the medical concerns at the time really did not push me exactly to rigorously seek a job. So I had a lot of time on my hands, so to speak, and I'm kind of a person that likes to stay active. So I knew I wanted to do another film, and from a topic standpoint, I just knew it had to be in West Seattle, because I really didn't want to leave West Seattle and try to battle that commute off the island. So at first, I was thinking maybe a fictional film of an inept archaeologist who's trying to find a buried treasure. And so I thought, gosh, who would bury a treasure? And the idea of Luna Park came to mind because it just seems so mysterious to begin with. So I started researching, all the characters of Luna Park, and Uncle Hiram, which I later was corrected. I think it's Uncle Hiram is how you pronounce that. But regardless, that individual kind of came to mind, and maybe Charles Loof, the manager of the park, and maybe they battled. And I just went down that rabbit hole of researching Luna Park in general. And finally, it just dawned on me, the real actual movie should be about Luna Park itself, particularly if my research could produce something, new that wasn't really currently out there or perhaps hard to find. So that's how I went with just, let's go straight documentary on Luna Park.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. We're glad that you made that decision. So for those that might not be that familiar with the history of Luna Park, kind of broadly speaking, I'm wondering if you might just be willing to provide a little historical background about the amusement park as an overview.
Yeah, well, West Seattle's Luna Park was one of many Luna Parks that opened up around the 20th century, really beginning the first one in Coney Island. It spread like wildfire really from there. Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Detroit, Denver, even hopped across the pond to multiple countries. So much so that, from what I'm told, in Europe, they don't even call amusement parks. They call them Luna Parks. But as far as Seattle's Luna Park specifically, it was the brainchild of Charles Loof, a master carver who designed and built the carousel, and built several carousels at other Luna Parks throughout the U.S. It was built on the boardwalk above the Duwamish Head, which is now where Anchor Park is located. And in fact, a plaque is there to commemorate the park as well. During that period, it was open. It was built several buildings and amusement rides along from 1907 to 1913. A lot of traveling acts went through it, performers, open air performers. It eventually succumbed due to a number of factors, probably a dwindling customer base being the main one, but lawsuits both internally and externally played a factor as well. And finally, the park closed in 1913, but the dancing pavilion and the natatorium really hung on until 1931, where it succumbed to fire. Some say arson, some not, but it's a little still vague. So that's the general history of Luna Park.
Thank you. Thanks. And I know we're going to learn a lot more shortly. I hope I'm not giving away the plot of the film we're about to enjoy together shortly, but Paul, throughout the film, you recreate the layout of Luna Park, of the amusement park, determining where specific attractions were located. And when I watched the film for the first time, I was really struck by your skills as essentially an historical detective, so to speak, recreating that layout. Where did you start? Where did you start in terms of pinpointing locations? I guess this is a multi-part question, so please feel free to stop me. So where did you start in terms of pinpointing locations? How long did it take you to recreate the layout? And I'm wondering, again, if you might just kind of walk us through that process and what it looked like for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So it started predictably, I would say, with Google searching, any kind of word or phrasing around Luna Park, Seattle, West Seattle, Duwamish Head, Charles Loof, just hundreds of different ways to try to find a new link that I hadn't seen before. Certainly lots of great articles came up, the Wikipedias and whatnot, history link and whatnot. A few that really come to mind, though, is a local individual, Paul Dorpat, and I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, has some great articles. I just absolutely fell in love with his writing style. Really kicked my interest up quite a bit. I used OneNote quite a bit extensively to find, scoured the web for photos, and specifically started to put them in different areas of what direction they were facing in the amusement park to really start to gather that understanding where everything was laid out. A few notables there. Otto Frosch's, and I hope I'm pronouncing that name as well, collection was just huge. I couldn't have made this video without that collection. Anyone interested at all in Seattle's history around this period really should visit that website. It's absolutely amazing. I reached out to David Chapman, his grandson, I believe, and he sent me several high resolution photos, some that I could find online, but I couldn't blow it up close enough. Where these I could actually go in and see the names on the buildings and the attractions and the advertisements on the billboards. And that really solved a lot of mysteries and puzzles I had, for sure. Certainly the photos from the Southwest Historical Society, thank you very much for those. Dove into the University of Washington special collections, and boy, trying to search different phrases on that website, but that's just a huge resource. Really, I listed all those photos that were courtesies of on the film, so certainly take a look at that if you're more interested. Shy of all the photos and really kind of putting the layout in place, I contacted both authors of the only two books on West Seattle's Luna Park. First of all, Patricia Filer's All Aboard for Luna Park, who was actually easy to get a hold of because my wife and I are good friends with two of her sons. So we invited her over. She shared us her collection and talked about, how her research was, and that was just, and shared some photos, and that was just amazing. I wish I would have recorded that. Quite frankly, that would have been kind of neat, maybe even to share in the video. I reached out to Aaron Naff, who wrote Seattle Luna Park. Really just kind of cold emailed him, and he was just very gracious. Reached back out. We had a great conversation. He shared photos with me that had not been published before, and really clued me in on a few of the names of the buildings, which was extremely helpful and helped correct me really on a few things that I was maybe heading down the wrong road. So that was very, very helpful as well. As far as all the attractions, that was kind of really the fun part. And that was about going through a lot of news articles from the Seattle Star, as well as the Tacoma, which I believe Times at the time, and searching anything that involved Luna Park. It was really kind of funny because it was obvious that the Seattle Star was where the Luna Park advertised, the attractions and whatnot. Here's what's coming up this weekend. So they're giving them money. And every once in a while you'd come across a news article, interviewing a small boy that went there and just had such a great time. And you could totally tell that this was not written by a small boy. It was just another advertisement, which was really kind of funny. But the other time, the Tacoma Times, they did not advertise in. So whenever you came up across a story about Luna Park in the Tacoma Times, you realize, oh, this might be somebody who just got injured or somebody died there. So you really got some interesting stories from the Tacoma Times versus the Seattle Star. So really combing through all these things. And I had some AutoCAD background in my facilities management days, and using that, finding that 1929 Sanborn fire insurance diagram was paramount, because then I could actually have the exact dimensions, and a third of the buildings were actually still intact. Would have been loved to have found like around a 1913 Sanborn fire insurance, because that would have been the actual layout with the completed buildings at the end of the amusement park's life cycle. But that's kind of how it all approached. It just, you could ask my wife. I was up till 3 a.m, and I had to just, tell myself to just go to bed, because I was just so fascinated and really trying to put the pieces together and really trying to confirm, at least 2 different ways, some things that were happening, so I could, get the exact layout. And I still, obviously, you'll see in the video, a lot of mystery still there that I wasn't able to figure out. But I think I was pretty happy with what I came up with, though.
Wonderful. Well, it sounds like you cast a very wide net, and that it was a really social enterprise for you in a way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Got to meet quite a few people in this.
So you just mentioned that there's still some, I guess, additional research or room for more investigation moving forward, and it leads me maybe to my next question. The next thought I have is, what challenges did you face when you were conducting this research and creating the film? Anything in particular that stood out to you as especially challenging?
Yeah, absolutely. From a research standpoint, this happened during COVID. So most of the research had to be completely done online or through conversation, at least until the libraries allowed curbside pickups. So I couldn't even visit a library or go to the Museum of History or Industry or whatnot. A funny story on that actually is, I knew I wanted to capture that 30,000 foot, view level, and really know what it would have been like to walk through the park and have that blueprint diagram, so to speak. So I put, a month and a half or 2 months into really building that based on the photos and any kind of scrap of information I could find. And I remember that the first time I could do the curbside pickup and check out the 2 books that were on West Seattle, Luna Park, I remember getting them and racing to my car and flipping through them. And I was kind of torn on a fence. One side of me wanted to think, gosh, I hope the diagram's in there, so I could take a look at my diagram and see how accurate I was. And the other side of me was like, I hope it's not in there, because that means I just wasted 2 months of research on something I just could have waited a month and a half and checked out in a book. But I'll tell you, once I did flip through that and notice that it wasn't out there, I kind of thought, wow, maybe I'm onto something here. And that was really the point where I decided, well, this might be something, what I'm putting together, others might really want to know about. So that's really when I said, the green light, so to speak, was, I'm going to do it. I'm going to make a documentary about this, because I think others should know about it. As far as challenges with making the film, in a nutshell, everything. I knew really nothing. As you mentioned, my first documentary, I was actually, to be honest with you, when you reached out to me, I was a little scared when you said you're going to show it, because I imagine you showed it on a 12-foot huge, screen on a wall, and it'd be all blurry because there wasn't enough megapixels, and I didn't, didn't size it right or whatnot. So I was kind of laughing about that. I think it only really plays well on a laptop or nothing bigger right now. So video, I had some challenges that I still have to learn. I filmed it. My sequence is just on a Fujifilm photo camera that I had on the video setting, and probably with some of the wrong settings even on that. Audio, aside from clearly rushing the narration, I would say it was kind of funny. I recorded everything in my car because it was the quietest place I could find. So I'd be talking, and then I'd have to wait as somebody would walk by. And I'd start talking again, and then wait as a car drove by or a plane flew over. And I even had to deal with a train sounding its horn repeatedly on the day I was trying to film. So maybe that's why I rushed it so much. I was just trying to get it through before the next sound hit, right? Editing, I had to purchase and completely learn from scratch Adobe Premiere Pro, which took quite a bit of time, but I absolutely love the process of learning all these things. So I don't mean to say it was a bad challenge. I really enjoyed the challenge and had a blast, quite frankly.
Well, we're looking forward to screening your next documentary on a 12-foot when the time comes.
Yeah, I'll let you know if it'll work or not.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So I imagine it's an understatement for a project of this scale and size that you probably came across a lot that surprised you during the research process, and that was somewhat unexpected. So I'm wondering if you might speak to anything that you found especially surprising or especially unexpected in your research that just kind of sticks out to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So not only was this during COVID, but it was also during George Floyd's death and the subsequent Black Lives Matter movement. So around this time of the research, my wife and I were proud to participate in Seattle's Black Lives March, the Jefferson Park. So during the research, it came more than a little bit of a surprise to see that advertised in the Seattle Star was one of the attractions was the African dip. It's I mentioned that in the I was torn really to how should I mention that in the film. And after researching, like I reached every attraction, what is an African dip? And I realized at best it was a dunk tank where you throw the ball, and instead of a clown, it was a Black individual, and you can imagine the language that probably ensued from that. At worst, it could have been a building where the individual was standing 20 or so feet back. Individuals got paid for 3 baseballs to basically throw it at them. And research and I saw some pretty horrific photos of the damage that could cause. So that was really surprising, quite frankly. And I wasn't sure exactly how to handle that. I was pretty torn whether I put it in the film or not put it in the film. So that certainly comes to mind right off the bat.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. A particular question that came to my mind when viewing the film, I'm going to just show a still here from the film itself. About just over 12 minutes into the film, you showcase this photo that you mentioned during the film. It provides kind of great insight into the people who visited Luna Park during the period it was open. What struck you about the photo? What did the photo tell you?
Yeah, just how completely different the individuals looked in the photo attending that amusement park versus how they would look today. I think maybe a comparison would be like photos taken of people flying in the early days versus now. Mostly adult males dressed in their Sunday bests. I think you see one child and maybe 3 or so women, other than one that's clearly a performer, looking at the camera. She wasn't looking at the camera, just kind of staring straight ahead, dressed in white, where everyone else is in, black hat and clothes. Which is a striking difference. And I think I mentioned, haunting in the film. But really, if you remove the woman and obviously the amusement rides and around the scene, you would have no way of guessing that this was an amusement park. And I just thought that was kind of wild. Other than, it's probably not as busy as the normal amusement park is today as well.
Fair enough. You mentioned a short while ago that you were kind of drawn to the project, at least to start, by people and by individuals. And you mention and explore many individuals and their relationship to Luna Park throughout the film itself. Was there anyone in particular that you found especially interesting or compelling? I'd love to hear a little bit more on your take.
Yeah. Well, obviously, Uncle Hiram, who started me down this path to begin with. It's funny. There was a news story, a rumor, if you will, that was published that he died during the off season, and it turned out to be false. And the park just ran with it and advertised how he was back. That was kind of fascinating. And I think there was a Cynthia Simpkins, the runaway boy, but it was a girl. And I'm pretty sure I believe she married Uncle Hiram, but I couldn't find enough about her or a photo to decide to mention that in the film. So that I found that extremely interesting. Honestly, though, just all the performers really mesmerized me. And I mean, if you could find enough on just about any of them, there'd be a full-length documentary. City electrician Ross, who fried eggs in his hands, just a local guy, I guess. And I would have died to have found a photo of him. The Fearless Gregs, Auto Daredevils. And keep in mind, this was during the really early points of automobile industry, and somehow they collided midair and walked away from it. Just it'd be interesting to find what the heck do those guys do after that, and gone down that path. So just every one of them really mesmerized me, to be honest with you.
Luna Park, I mean, it only existed for a short period in history. But in your perspective, what does Luna Park tell us about the city of Seattle during that time? Is there any kind of a broader narrative that rose to the surface for you?
Yeah, it was a city, like really still recovering from the devastating fire of 1889, and really on a rapid rebuild. Quite similar, I would say, to the unbelievable growth we're seeing in our city in recent years as well. But during the time, everything was changing. You had the Alaska Yukon Pacific Exposition that happened in 1909 that really shaped UW's campus. Cars were, just showing up on the roads. Just 20 short years before Luna Park, there was no electricity, and now there's silent films being shown at the park. West Seattle specific, was incorporated into the city of Seattle. To try to curb the drinking perhaps at Luna Park a little bit, but really one of the other bigger was to build a better bridge into West Seattle. And boy, doesn't that sound familiar right now? Even the light rail, or that we're trying to get into our West Seattle right now. Well, there was a rail installed to get to Luna Park and above the bluffs above Salties to get up to California was built around this time. So a lot of comparisons, I would say, to what we're seeing right now, actually. And I thought that was really interesting.
Particularly the bridge. I imagine there's a lot of people tuning in right now that element of the story or the broader history is particularly relevant to them.
Yeah.
So your film, it's very comprehensive. I mean, but as you noted at the beginning of our conversation, there's some information that didn't make the cut, so to speak. I guess perhaps there's a pun intended there. What didn't make the cut? Anything of note that you'd like to share with our audience tonight?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I fully believe that this could have easily been a full-length film, and perhaps it would have if I would just talked a little slower. But if I were to stretch it out, I would have loved to included interviews with the authors. This is something that Patricia. Interviews with authors, but also interviews with relatives. Maybe somebody's grandfather or father who told them a story about a time they went to Luna Park. Patricia Filer mentioned that. I thought that was a great idea, and I almost went down that path and extended the film that way. More in-depth analysis of the performers, their lives. What did they do before, during, and after at Luna Park? Did their grandchildren follow suit, or children follow suit in those professions? More information on the Luna Park craze that happened during the 20th century, the boom and the bust of that industry, and what happened there. Certainly diving, if I would have like a full feature length, I would have dove into the African dip a little bit, and how that wasn't just in Seattle's Luna Park, it was in several, and just kind of put a spotlight on that dark history a little bit, as I think it was needed. And certainly the demise of Seattle's Luna Park itself. What went wrong exactly? Why did the crowds diminish? What happened exactly with Charles Loof and the owners of the Natatorium and the Dancing Pavilion? What went south there? And maybe, what did Charles Loof do after that? And what happened to the carousel? And maybe go to San Francisco and kind of take a photo of that, or a film of that, of being in action and still being used.
So I just want to let our audience know I've only got a couple more questions for Paul before we screen the film. So if you have some questions, I just wanted to give you a little heads up. Please use that Q&A function. It should be at the bottom of your screen, and I will pass those questions along to Paul on your behalf. Paul, a question I've been dying to ask you is, if you had the chance to visit Luna Park yourself, after all the research you've done, what attraction or ride might you want to, what attraction or ride would you have wanted to enjoy the most?
Yeah, well, I would have loved to have had a beer in the longest bar in Elliott Bay and just watch that crowd interact. That would have been kind of interesting, and then maybe walk out and go through the Joker House or the Third Degree. But really, it would have been just being a fly on the wall, and just seeing the crowd and watch their reactions, and keep in mind this is before TV and Instagram, so if there's a first time there at the amusement park, it's all new and there's really nothing to prepare them to just to watch the pure shock and awe, as they watch the acrobats or did the Luna, one of the log rides, or the ride the chutes, I should say, and just observed it. I think would have been just absolutely amazing.
And I guess the final question I have for you before we turn things over to the audience would be, what's next for you? It sounds as though there's more research that could be done about Luna Park, another documentary. Do you have any other projects in the works? What are you looking forward to?
Yeah. I think if you ask my wife and friends, they'd tell you I get heavily focused on one thing and then maybe put it aside and dive into something completely different. So right now I'm into landscape design and art, but I'm quickly running out of land in my yard. So I'll probably be moving on to something else in the near future. As far as film goes, though, yeah, I mean, certainly doing a full length of Luna Park is in the back of my mind. I'd also like to something that I actually started going down the road before getting back into the corporate world of doing a documentary about low tide hiking, particularly in the Puget Sound. So it's such a unique environment. I mean, over 300 miles of land that open up during low tide. So exploring, what routes we can do, exits, what's the correct low tide to do them at was fascinating, but also to dive into the legalities of it. I actually contacted several people that were some were involved in some lawsuits that happened in the past. And I think it's absolutely fascinating that it really hasn't been solidified whether you can or you can't go from one public place to another during low tide. Some say yes, some say no, but it's still indefinitive. But I just find that really interesting. So I may do something like that in the near future.
Well, we're looking forward to it, to say the least. And again, let us know. We'll have to arrange for a 12-foot screen to have everybody come watch it in person when we can get back together here at the museum as in larger groups, which we're very much looking forward to. I guess I want to make sure that our audience has an opportunity to ask a few questions before we screen the film. So again, I'll stop myself there. I feel like there's so much more we could talk about. We do have one question that came in from Dora Fay. She says, so interesting. Did we hear Paul say that were other Luna parks in other areas around the country? It sounds like that's a clarifying question.
Oh yeah, there's literally hundreds of Luna parks throughout the world. I think in the U.S. itself, I'm not sure how many still remain. Certainly, there's one in New York, and I believe there's several hundreds still throughout the world.
Thank you. Any other questions at this time? Otherwise, we can dive right into the film screening. We're going to have a little time after the film as well for any questions that you might have for Paul. So please feel free to ask at that time as well. It looks like we have a question from Judy. Do you have views from Luna Park across the street to the homes in the neighborhood? Paul.
I do not have, I have the ones that come out is autos that were from the pointing towards the Puget Sound, but I don't think I found any that were, there was one that was in the bay in the film that I did add that had Luna Park sign on it. That kind of shows going towards Mount Rainier, so to speak, and Duwamish Head above there. And I'm trying to think if there even were any buildings in that photo in the bluffs, and I don't think there were. So I'm not sure how many homes there were really around on the top of that cliff, so to speak.
Any other questions before we screen the film? It looks like That might be it for now, which is perfectly, oh, we got one more. Was the whole park on pilings above the beach, or was some on the land?
No, all of it was on the pilings on the beach, from what I gather. And that was a good question. I think there's a good photo showing the track that goes around there, and there was a little place for parking cars, but that was also on pilings. I thought that was really interesting too. You know, why would they put it all on pilings? It had to have been expensive, and I started thinking, you know, this would probably be before concrete. And like it seems like all of them across the world were on pilings. And I'm guessing it's because it would have been so muddy and dirty, and also like it's flat land. But yes, from what I gather, it was all on pilings, and then just slowly was removed. If you look at the early sandboard fires compared to like the 1929, and see some of that, you can see it's just slowly being torn down.
Thanks for sharing that with us. With that, we should probably dive into the film itself, right? I think I'm sure there's a lot of eager viewers tuning in right now. So again, we'll have a chance for another brief Q&A with Paul after we screen the film, but we should dive in. Enjoy.
If you're like me, you may have heard a few rumors about Seattle's long-lost amusement park. Perhaps you possess a rough idea of where it was located off the shores of West Seattle. Maybe you even dined at the Luna Park Cafe and browsed through their extensive collection of photos on the walls. However, lacking a clear understanding of the rides and ever-evolving attractions that entertain the throngs there, this video is put together. It is Let's Go to Luna Park, Location, Layout, and Attractions of Seattle's Lost Luna Park by Paul Moyes. I should begin by saying that if you're expecting to be wowed by some amazing graphics or Dolby surround sound, you're going to be a bit disappointed. This is basically PowerPoint, mixed in with some songs and stories from the era, but I think using these tools, we can paint a clear picture of what it would have been like to have walked around Luna Park when it was still open. But before we dive into the park, let's take a step back and understand where exactly it was located, how large it was, and how people got to and from the park itself. Working off a Google map, we see downtown Seattle in the top right and West Seattle in the bottom left. More importantly, the northern tip of West Seattle is visible, which is named the Duwamish Head. It was here that in 1906 the 12-acre park was constructed for just over $100,000, which equates to about $3 million in today's money. Zooming in will also gain a better sense of the size and position of the park. The first clue in understanding this was the discovery of an original drawing. This may have been created by Charles Loof, the master carver of the carousel and one of the designers and managers of the park. However, it proved challenging to align this map directly onto Duwamish Head because it was made prior to Alki Avenue being paved in 1923. Before that period, the shores around this area were lined with pilings for the raised rail, which can clearly be seen in the photos to the left. Fortunately, a 1929 Sanborn fire insurance map was located, which was made after Alki Avenue went in, but before the majority of Luna Park's boardwalk was demolished. As you can see, this map aligns perfectly on top of Duwamish Head. To add a bit more clarity, a pre-Alki Avenue 1917 Sanborn map was then superimposed on top of the 1929 boardwalk, detailing now the exact dimensions and locations of nearly a third of the buildings located on the western side of the boardwalk. We'll use this shell going forward to help us build Luna Park. Let's now take a look at how people got to and from the park, as it is pretty interesting. The first option would be to take a ferry. One could board the City of Seattle, which departed from the Marion Street dock in downtown Seattle. This was certainly the express route, as it dropped passengers directly off at Luna Park. Or, the West Seattle Ferry was an option, leaving downtown a bit south of the Coleman Dock where it would cross Elliott Bay, and I have no idea what that guy in the rowboat was thinking. The captain must have just loved him. Regardless, the ferry would arrive at the West Seattle Foot Dock, which was at Louisiana Street then, a half block or so west from the existing ferry dock in front of the Marination restaurant. Passengers would then flow out of the ferry, turn right onto Railroad Avenue, it was known back then, and walk a few short blocks to the entrance of Luna Park, seen here in the near distance. The second option would be to hop on a streetcar in downtown Seattle, rumble south on the tracks past the Soto area, which was just tide flats back then, hang a right and glide over what is now Harbor Island. The streetcar would then wind its way along the shoreline and eventually end right in front of Luna Park, which can be seen peeking out just behind that streetcar pictured here. I suppose if you really shunned away from public transport, you could take a personal vehicle to the park. It would likely have been a horse and buggy though, as the assembly line had yet to be implemented by Henry Ford, making cars fairly expensive still. On the bright side, if you made the journey in that fashion, it appears there would have been plenty of parking available when you got there. Let's now jump into the heart of Luna Park and see what it may have been like to have walked around it when it was still open between 1907 and 1913. Beginning with that shell we created, let's go ahead and slide that to the left to give us some more room. We'll begin our journey at the southeast corner of the boardwalk where the Alhambra-themed main entrance is located. Here, Uncle Hiram and his pet pig Betsy might greet you as you arrive. We're going to be talking a bit more about Uncle Hiram later, as he was such an interesting character and one of the main staples of the park. But first, let's pay the 10-cent admission fee and walk under the fluttering flags and through the gates. Spilling in through the entrance, you may choose to drop your hat or coat off at the check room located to the immediate right. Now, the rest of these open-air buildings aligned in a row, it's not certain what exactly went on in there. They may have simply been shelters for the open-air performers to go and entertain when it was raining outside. They could have also been pens where animals were kept at night or between acts. Several animals were present during the park's history. A few examples include ponies, horses, dogs, pigs, monkeys, ostriches, a badger was even there, and obviously bears were kept inside the park's bear cage. Regardless, between the open-faced shelters and the bear cage, free amusement was provided at varying intervals throughout the day. Here, it is advertised that the La Souza Clown Band will be going on every 3:30, 6, and 9 p.m. It may be approaching one of those times, as two of the clowns appear to be making their way to that area now. Here's a photo of the rest of the band, and not exactly the happiest bunch I've ever come across. Who knows? Maybe we just caught them on a bad day. Walking westbound a few steps, we arrive at the Great Figure 8 roller coaster, and no, that's not a detailed drawing of the ride, it's simply the number 8, but I think you get the picture. Customers would sit down on the coaster's train, be cranked 120 feet skyward, and released to the perils of gravity. They would soon find themselves serpentining down the circuit at a staggering 6 miles per hour. Yeah, not exactly the adrenaline-pumping experience we get from today's rides, but I'm sure it was well worth the 10 cents back then. Sliding the map down, we get back to our friend Uncle Hiram, and the song we are listening to now, Hiram Green Goodbye, is the one he modeled himself after. He loved this song apparently and used to sing and dance to it across the Northwest. We see Hiram pictured here inside the park, pulling a Studebaker wagon full of dogs using a small gas-powered vehicle. It seems when that car broke down, poor Betsy would have to pull the wagon herself. Interesting story about Hiram and Betsy. When the piglet got older, she lost a bit of her cuteness according to some and was scheduled for the chopping blocks by her owner, Charles Loof. Well, Hiram loved that pig, and despite likely not making a whole lot of cash back then, he managed to scrape enough funds together to buy Betsy off Charles, thereby saving her life. Good on you, Uncle Hiram. The reason we are bringing up Uncle Hiram now, though, is because pictured in the background we see a chicken farm. No, this is not where they kept live chickens. It was a ball-tossing game where folks would aim for a wooden hen, and if they knocked it down, the toppled hen would release a real boiled egg. The winners could season the egg to their liking with salt and pepper that was kept right there on the countertop. For a period, the front section of the chicken farm housed a Wonders of the World whale exhibit. It was boasted that over 20 men could fit in the skull that was located inside. Medical doctors paid no entrance fee. The building was also the Joker at some point, a fun house of sorts. The park also advertised a mystic maze, which seems to have been a wall of mirrors that may have been located inside the Joker. It also offered the Temple of Mirth at one point, as well as the Third Degree, both of which appear to have been fun houses. Therefore, either they changed the name to the temple, or that attraction was in a completely separate building somewhere within the park. Right next to the Joker and the chicken farm was a large white building that took only 5 days to construct. It's where they stored an airship that they charged 10 cents for people to take a peek inside and view it. This was the brainchild of L. Guy Mecklem, an aeronaut who owned the entire operation. He designed the airship, bought and stitched over 300 pounds of Japanese silk. He even made the hydrogen that was used to float the ship. The hydrogen plant is pictured here. It required 2,000 pounds of sulfuric acid, 2,500 pounds of cast iron shavings, 300 pounds of ice, and a barrel of lime. And in case you were wondering, no, it wasn't a safe production. Mecklem had acid sprayed on him at least once, and unfortunately he quickly found out that diving into the Puget Sound did very little to alleviate the burns. To add insult to injury, Mecklem's first flight did not go as planned, as the airship rose too quickly, abruptly expanded, and burst to seam. You could see people running away from it like crazy here. Fortunately, that split occurred on the bottom of the balloon, thereby containing the hydrogen within the airship, as opposed to happening on top, which would have immediately released all the gas and sent the pilot plunging to his demise. The second flight proved more successful after Mecklem hired 2 seamstresses to help him repair the aircraft. One woman became nauseous from the hydrogen fumes, but the second one did not, and Mecklem eventually ended up marrying her. So I guess it paid to have a hydrogen tolerance if you wanted to snag an aeronaut back then. Love must have been in the air quite literally around Luna Park, as pioneering pilot Harry Christopherson, who charged individuals $1 per minute to fly them around the Sound, took a park cashier up one day, and you probably guessed it, the two ended up getting married as well. A few steps away from the airship hangar, a large round building sat that was originally used as the park's bandstand. but it didn't have the greatest acoustics, so they ended up converting it to a joy wheel ride. This is where individuals would stand in the center of a circular room, the floor would start to spin, going faster and faster, until the participants were flung to the sidewalls that were hopefully well padded. Next to the joy wheel, a platform was set up that extended 120 feet into the air and was positioned just behind an incredibly shallow tank. This is where extreme high divers Diavolo and Melville would showcase their unique talents. If you can believe it, Diavolo even lit the surface of the water on fire one night before flopping himself into it. Not surprisingly, he was injured and needed to be rushed to the local hospital. Luckily, he survived, but several performances needed to be canceled while he slowly mended. At the northern point of the boardwalk, 3 features were lumped in close proximity. Moving from left to right was the Cave of Mystery, an unusually shaped building that was appropriately named, as not a whole lot is known about what went on there. In the center, a balloon was staged for ascensions and parachute drops. Captain Davidson and Sylvan would hold on to the balloon for dear life as it rose in the air, letting go at the right height before deploying the parachute and likely floating into Elliott Bay. I know Davidson lost at least one parachute in the salty waters, and the balloon itself could be a crapshoot to bring back down safely on windy days. To make things more complicated, Sylvan performed a stunt one 4th of July where he attached fireworks to his ripcord so they would go off right when the parachute opened. The thought was Sylvan would gently float through the pyrotechnics while making his way down. Now, I could be wrong, but that does not sound like a good idea, as I'm pretty sure silk is flammable. The fact that this stunt was only advertised once leads me to believe that they also had second thoughts soon thereafter. To the right was where the new and improved shell-shaped bandstand was built. It even had an awning for attendees to sit comfortably under and listen to the smooth sounds of De Castro's Royal Military Band of 30 pieces, or famous Nicholas Sholzani's Hungarian Hussar Band of 40 pieces, or even Professor Meyer's band with number of pieces unlisted. Just behind the bandstand, we see the City of Seattle ferry poking out, so this must be where passengers deboarded when they arrived at the park. I imagine the ferry schedule had to flex appropriately with the lunar cycle, as even that far offshore, the waters may have been too shallow for a large boat to dock during extreme low tides. However, since this is the deepest point of the park, this may have been where they stored the Wang Ho while it was there on exhibit. For a price, customers could board the Chinese pirate fighting ship and cruise through its extensive arsenal and well-stocked torture devices. We now arrive at the giant whirl where 6 boat swings are attached to a central motor that would spin patrons around at a dizzying speed. It was also known as the circle swing or flying swing to latch onto the Wright brothers' success. It was the invention of Harry Trevor, who installed several similar rides across the country. Right behind and to the left of the swing was a white building that was dubbed the Corelli Theater. The park had at least 3 separate theaters, so it's uncertain what went on in this one versus the others. However, the building next door we do know more about. It was the Canals of Venice, a tunnel of love of sorts. Gondolas gently floated people through scenic landscapes of that Italian region. A paddle wheel was likely used to control a steady rate of flow through the canal. Here's a photo taken from Elliott Bay showing the backside of the Canals of Venice, and that was used as a giant billboard to advertise the park. Carving a line straight through the middle of Luna Park was the infamous shoot-to-chute rides, an early version of log flumes we now have today. People would align themselves in a boat that was perched precariously on top of a steep slope, say their prayers, then glide down the rails before crashing violently into the waiting pond. Today's log flumes have a rather gentle transition between slope and water. However, the shoot-to-chutes boat hit the water at a fairly steep angle, which at impact would absolutely launch the boat's front end up into the air. That's probably why they aligned so many benches around the ride as a great place for people to sit and watch the carnage unfold. This photo was such a great find because it unveils so many insights about the park. From the back right, we have the Cave of Mystery, the Corelli Theater being built to the left of it. Directly in front of the Corelli Theater is the Circle Swing. Then we see the Canals of Venice, the Shoot-the-Chutes ride, and the bridge that went over it. I also love this photo because it really showcases the type of people that attended the park. As you can tell, you didn't exactly wear sweatpants and a t-shirt here, as the people shown in the photos are dressed in the nines. There's also very few children present in this photo or any others taken within the park. Thus, despite the park advertising itself as a family-friendly environment, the photos appear to contradict that, as the majority of the patrons appear to be predominantly adult males. Finally, one's focus tends to be drawn towards the woman on the left in this photo. Admit it, you've already noticed her. Either she's 9 foot tall or standing on a platform or maybe stilts. But regardless, her light complexion paired with a deep wooded stare towards nothingness is simply haunting. Sliding the map to the right, we could see what was hiding behind the Shoot-the-Chutes ride. It was a series of concession stands, souvenir shops, and gambling games. A shooting gallery with a large bullseye on top can be seen in the bottom photo. Japanese games, penny arcades, and baby racks were just a few options to choose from. In case you were wondering what a baby rack is, well, here you go. The northwest corner of the park housed Christensen's Dancing Pavilion that was open every day except Sundays. Also inside the building was a 600-capacity restaurant and the longest and best-stocked bar in all of Elliott Bay. Rainier Brewery even sponsored a beer garden just outside to help keep the good times rolling. All this rampant drinking did not sit well with the citizens of West Seattle, though, and just 2 days after the park opened, they successfully voted to be annexed into the city of Seattle. To the left is the actual voting card, and to the right, the old Stockade Hotel where those votes were cast. However, this did very little to curb the drinking at Luna Park, as the mayor of Seattle was in cahoots at the time with the chief of police to open up a 500-room brothel on Beacon Hill. One of the major shareholders of that venture, well, just happened to be W. Powers, co-owner of the company that ran Luna Park. Walking past the dancing pavilion, we reached the Natatorium and bathhouse, which offered 2 slightly warm saltwater pools, one dedicated to the ladies, and a freshwater pool. All 3 pools combined could hold over 1,000 bathers at one time. The Natatorium also hosted several events over the years, such as water carnivals with swim races, diving contests, and water polo matches to help draw the crowds in. Also available was a chute, a swing, a springboard, rings, a trapeze, a high dive, but these should only be used at your own risk. Perhaps it's appropriate here to note that at least 3 people drowned inside the Natatorium while it was open. This is a rare collector's item, a pair of men's swim trunks that are over 120 years old and actually from Luna Park Natatorium. They were likely rented and used at least once in the pool. However, gentlemen, a top must still be worn or you risk being cited for indecent exposure. The Natatorium and Dancing Pavilion were the last 2 buildings standing at Luna Park, and they were kept open for almost 2 full decades after the main park closed. Because of this, several ads in local newspapers, such as the Seattle Star, can be found, enticing people to come and take cooling plunges in the Natatorium's healing waters. What we have here is an excellent photo taken from the top of the figure 8 roller coaster that clearly shows the Dancing Pavilion on the top right and the Natatorium on the left. In front of those 2 buildings stands a large round building called a Hippodrome. Here are a few more photos of the Hippodrome, which basically protected the carousel inside of it. As far as the carousel itself, it was a masterpiece, hand-carved by Charles Loop himself at his workshop back east in Rhode Island. Charles made several carousels throughout his career, but this was perhaps his finest. Many unique features were incorporated in its design. As an example, the horse shown here with all 4 hooves suspended off the ground was a Charles Loop innovation. But I think the carousel's most impressive attribute is the fact that it's still fully intact, completely restored, and still operating thanks to many generous contributions from dedicated donors. It can now be ridden just like it was over a century ago at Yerba Buena Gardens near San Francisco. Right behind the Hippodrome was the one and only exit out of the park. Thus, from a fire code standpoint, it was leave that way or off the boardwalk into the Puget Sound. Which brings us to the real heart of Luna Park, if you ask me. An area that just can't be replicated today. It's where the foreign foot jugglers, the ruse clowns, the child acrobats went on, where old vaudeville songs rang out, new fandangled technology mesmerized, and exotic beasts from afar both shocked and awed. It's also been one of the hardest to dial in, because many of the exhibits were frequently switched out. The performers, well, they fluttered around the country, perhaps even the world, drifting with the seasons. Adding to our troubles is the fact that a few of the buildings held tightly to their secrets, as no photographs could be found on their front face or signage. But hey, what's an amusement park without a little mystery? Let's go ahead and slide that map to the top left and begin dissecting those buildings, beginning with the first one from the exit. Now, this one clearly had a large smokestack attached to it, similar to the one protruding from the Natatorium's roof. With this in mind, it would make sense that the building was used as a glass-blowing factory for the various souvenirs sold at the park. The photo on the bottom left is one such item preserved from the park. Another possibility is this building was a restaurant. This photo was supposedly taken within Luna Park, and there appears to be a tree in the background to the right. If that is the case, and this photo was actually taken inside Seattle's Luna Park, then this seems to be the only building that it could possibly be. Now, the next 3 buildings, buildings 2, 3, and 4, it's unknown what they were, as not a single photo could be found that shed any light on the roles that they may have played. However, here are a couple exhibits that were at Luna Park and likely located in at least one of them. There certainly was a magic photography palace within the park, as several gimmick photographs such as these were found. One interesting note, it was so unusual to be in a car during this era that people were willing to pay to have their photos taken in one. One of these buildings could have been the Haunted Swing, an illusion ride where people would sit in suspended seats and the room itself would spin. Back and forth it would go, higher and higher, and eventually going all the way around. It must have been quite an effective deception, as participants would tend to hold onto their hats and wonder why they weren't coming off their head. Another building could have been the Wireless 10-set exhibit. Funny story here. William Duplier, an inventor, claimed to have been the first person to broadcast a radio station in Seattle. He joked to the Seattle Daily Times that whenever he went to Luna Park, the wireless exhibit would always be out of order. Well, that's because he wasn't at home, broadcasting the only station it could pick up. Here's a list of other candidates for those buildings: a Den of Snakes, an Oriental Theater, Temple of Mirth, Mystic Maze, Gapery, The Laughing Gallery, and last but not least, Creation. The next building over was obvious. It was an ice cream parlor and soda shop. In the building next to it, a Day in the Alps exhibit. You could just make out the Bavarian theme on the face of it and see the sign for it posted near the front entrance back and to the left of Uncle Hiram. We now arrive at the famous Trocadero Theater, where high-class musical comedy is promised and delivered. Several fabulous acts went on at the Trocadero, including Angela May's comic opera, where she'll likely be singing her $10,000 hit song All Aboard for Luna Park. It's Seattle's first big popular song success and what we're listening to right now. Although I do not believe it's Angela singing in this version. Mantell's Marionette Hippodrome. There's that funny word again. He also went on as the Royal Marionette and sometimes as Mantell's Mannequins. Mantell fabricated a fairy transformation performance with big scenic novelty, 17 gorgeous drop curtains, 45 elegant talking acting figures, and a comical pantomime. Yeah, it was a puppet show, and his real name was Leonard Bierce. For the first time in the West, you could have witnessed at the Trocadero the Filipino midgets. Yeah, that was a real thing. Martina de la Cruz, also known as Jeannie, and her brother Juan or John traveled throughout the country in the early part of the 20th century. They were even at the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis. So, apparently, gazing at people of short stature, preferably from the Philippines, was kind of a big deal. Interesting story about Ginny and John. Later in their life, their home caught on fire one night when they were sleeping, and their dog, Kinky King, saved them. Aw, good puppers. Also at the Trocadero, you could have seen James Fitzgerald, the original human ostrich. I don't know. Just about everyone seemed to have the original moniker back then. The original ostrich, the original ruse clown, the original foot juggler from Japan. Well, that last one might have been accurate. There also seemed to have been a suspicious number of professors working the amusement park circuit. Regardless, this original human ostrich was 6 feet 6 inches tall and could eat a variety of indigestible objects. A sign advertising his performance is seen posted on the top of the Trocadero. Now, I don't have a good photo of James, but here is one showing all the items the doctors removed from his stomach after he, for some reason, complained of having abdominal pains. Over 50 items were surgically removed, including knives, blade handles, keys, shards of glass, a $10 gold coin. Now that's a bank you could trust right there, probably saving it one day to pay for the surgery to have it removed. Unfortunately, James died at the age of 69 from dropsical complications. I do not know what dropsical is, but I imagine it has something to do with eating things you probably shouldn't. There's a new comedy act going on at the Trocadero Theater every single week, but more importantly, they had wrestling. Okay, that's not one of the actual wrestlers from Luna Park, but he's from that era, and Jack Briggs and Frank Rose did wrestle there. The Trocadero Theater started off occupying 2 buildings, but it was later split apart with Trocadero on the one side and the Third Degree on the other. Not a whole lot was written about this particular Third Degree, but these amusement parks tended to copy each other quite a bit, and the Palisades Park in New Jersey had a Third Degree funhouse. It likely got its name because of the electrified handrails that were installed to shock unsuspecting patrons. Next door to the Trocadero was a Lost Child building. Now, as mentioned before, there doesn't seem to have been a whole lot of children at the park in any of these photos, so it's unclear if this building was where people went to find their lost child, or where they kept children lost. The building to the left of that was clearly advertised as being admission-free, but it was nearly impossible to figure out what happened in it. If you don't believe me, just try Googling admission-free and see how many clicks down it takes before you reach any information on this building. However, whatever went on in there clearly needed a lot of doors to enter and exit from. Maybe a penny arcade, or perhaps this is where the restroom was located? Continuing on, we come across the Dreamland Theater that offered a new play each week to keep things fresh. But at one point, this building was also the infant electrobator. Just to recap, we have one building dedicated to keeping lost children and one for electrobating infants. Okay, the electrobator we know what's up with. It was actually an early version of an incubator. They had these set up at the 1909 Alaska-Yukon Pacific Exposition. Boy, that's a mouthful. It was held in Seattle, thus I'm guessing a few of these made their way over to Luna Park after that World's Fair ended. The real question, though, is did they actually have real infants being nursed to health inside Luna Park? That was the case at the AYPE, and this building appears to have been large enough, so it's a distinct possibility. Could you only imagine, though? I'm sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, but your baby was born premature. Good news, though. We're going to rush it over to Luna Park and try saving its life there. Feel free to visit your baby at any time, as long as it's within park hours, and you pay the 10-cent entrance fee just like everyone else who want to gawk at your struggling newborn. We now circle back to the ever-smiling La Souza Clown Band, pictured here in front of Pat, the educated horse building. Pat's trainer was Earl Smith, and the two traveled all around the vaudeville circuit. Prince Pat apparently was a very smart horse who held up his end of the act by demonstrating an uncanny horse sense. The building was also the jungle with trained wild animals. This is where Don Carlos and Leon Morris and Fred Leslie went out and blew people's minds with their animal acts. It seems Morris had a man wrestle a pony for some reason. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of rooting for the pony in that one. Finally, when technology caught up, the building was converted into a 10-set electrical theater that showed moving pictures, as they were still called back then. Perhaps a bit of foreshadowing into a new form of entertainment that would eventually lead to the demise of so many other forms that were still functioning at the park. I really do wonder if the clowns, or the jugglers, maybe even the acrobats looked over at that building and went, uh-oh. Speaking of which, the area located closest to the entrance was where the open-air performers tended to congregate, likely to wow people as they entered the park. It's here where Charles Leora would perform his sensational slide for life, zipping down a 700-foot cable while holding on for dear life with just his teeth, or by his feet when that got old. You had Madame Shell and her performing lions. I'm guessing this took place in the bear cage, but maybe not. Things were just different back then. The Great Martel's trick cyclists would work their magic here without a safety net, I might point out, just the way it should be done. The only juvenile female horizontal bar artist in the world, the Loretta twins, assisted by Harvey, the 5-year-old baby clown. Really? I guess it beats working in a sweatshop. Young Samson, the modern Hercules, was there pulling horses and breaking chains with his supreme flexes. And Captain Leopold, the jiu-jitsu champion of the world, would demonstrate his skills by giving some poor sap a swift chop in the neck before trying to smother his breath while checking for a pulse. I don't know. Dozens of great acts such as these flowed through the park over the years, and for those curious, a more thorough list is provided at the end of this film. We'll now sprinkle in some benches, a few souvenir and concession stands, maybe a tarot card reading or fortune-telling booth, and we now have a complete picture of Luna Park and where it was situated on Duwamish Head. Unfortunately, though, the good times could not last, and after dwindling attendance in both internal and external lawsuits, Charles Loof packed his bags in 1913, sold his share of the park, and headed south. The majority of the park closed soon thereafter, having only been in existence 5 short years. The Natatorium and Dancing Pavilion continued on for nearly 2 decades, but finally succumbed to an arsonist match on April 14, 1931. Hopes to rebuild the Natatorium slowly faded away, and in 1933 the city condemned the destroyed remains and followed up by filling the swimming pool in to avoid lawsuits in 1946. Finally, in 1954, the remaining skeleton of the Natatorium was removed, leaving only cement pilings peeking out from the sand, which can still be seen during extreme low tides today. Although all the attendees who visited Luna Park are now long gone and taking most of the memories with them, perhaps now, after taking this virtual tour, we have a glimpse into what it might have felt like to have woken up one sunny Seattle day in the early part of the 20th century, found a few disposable dimes hiding in our pockets, and thought, hey, let's go to Luna Park.
I know this may be a bit uncomfortable, but snakes have been depicted in every civilization since the beginning of time. Since the beginning of time. Frog stories and references, hybrid bloodlines. Their lizards interbreeding.